Hello, you guys. Good morning. I am knocking this out today with my morning coffee before I go hop over to my desk and, get to work today. I didn't want to have to break up the flow recording this because I want to do this, but I also have a lot to do today. So we're gonna just, knock it out now. So I finished another book. This one is what's called The Path to the Spider's Nest, and it's by Italo Calvino. And it is a book that I was actually assigned to read while I was studying abroad in Italy. I went during the summer of 2016 as part of my college education. Really, it's always been a dream I had. I grew up in a pretty poor family, and visiting Italy was like a true dream. And as soon as I realized that studying abroad was an option and it wasn't that hard to get into, I signed right up. And it is hands down the best decision I've made outside of meeting my now boyfriend, who I adore. Choosing to study abroad was like, I tell everybody, like anyone who's even like halfway thinking about it, I'm like, you need to do this. It's also, I'm gonna throw this out there, it was a good bang for my buck. I paid probably like $3,000 total, because there are a lot of scholarships available when you're doing it to study, and especially if you're low income like I was, and $3,000 for over a month in Italy with like guided tours included and visiting all these different places. I'm just saying that was my experience with it. It was fantastic. And it gave me this book that I will be honest, I didn't read. I read about half of it while I was there. Your days are so jam-packed. You get up and you're out the door by like 7, and you get back. It may not even be that late, but you're exhausted because you've been walking all day. You've been, seeing, it's amazing. You're seeing all these cool things, but we were go, go, go from sun up to sundown. And by the time I got back, I remember trying to read this book. I remember laying in my bed and just falling asleep before even making it through a full page. So it's a shame, really, because it's not a very long book. I should have just read it then. You can see that's about what the text looks like. It's a decent size. It's not bad at all. It's only, I believe it's 184 pages and 185 for this edition. So, all right, I guess a little bit of background. It is a historical fiction. It's set during World War II. It's about this kid named Pin. No spoilers here. It's about this kid named Pin. His sister's a prostitute, and she kind of doesn't discriminate between if you're German or not, and no one appreciates that. Okay, my cat's being noisy. I'm sorry. Percy. Come here, baby. Ugh. Don't chew on it. So he steals a pistol from a German officer while he's with his sister, and ends up running away and joining a group of partisans. And that's like the gist of it. That's all pretty much on the back cover. So I try not to give spoilers. I try to give thoughts and opinions, but not spoilers. Sorry, my hair is a mess because I haven't gotten ready. I mean, like, it comes with the coffee. I don't clean up until post-coffee. So thoughts. There is something interesting about hearing or reading about these events that it's like, sure, that could have been, yes, there was fighting and the partisans and the German army and all of that. I love a good historical fiction. As I say, what makes this book so interesting is that it is in the perspective of a child. So Pin is, I think I read somewhere that on the Italian Wikipedia it says he's 10. So I don't know if that's accurate or not. It doesn't say specifically in the book, but we'll say he's like around 10. He's like 10 to 12 is probably the range. And he's talking about all of these things in this interesting perspective because all of the adults know what's happening. They know why they're mad. They know why they don't support the Germans in this instance. And he doesn't really get it. He's a child. No one's necessarily telling him all the things that have happened, the things that have been done. He doesn't really get why they suddenly don't like his sister anymore, because previously all the men loved his sister. I mean, they would visit her. And now they like hold this grudge, and he doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand what's happening, what's changing. But he has these like grown-up friends, and because they say, oh, we hate the Germans, he's like, well, I hate the Germans too, you know, because he's just following suit. He's just following the like paths of the people that he sees as kind of role models. So it's always really interesting when you can take events like World War II and everything that goes with it and everything that we all know now and look at it from the perspective of essentially a child living in a small town, village, and not quite getting it, not knowing what's going on, not knowing why they're fighting and taking up arms and like care so much. So with that being said, there's a prologue in this book that is written by the author himself, Italo Calvino, because this is his first book, and he doesn't like it. He kind of talks about how within the writing in this book, it's not his writing style anymore. He was still figuring himself out. It was written inspired by events of the time, but he doesn't like the way that he executed it, basically. And a lot of the gripes that he has are the same gripes that I have. So I think if you do think of reading this book, get the edition with his intro in it. He didn't write, I think it was like 10 years after the book came out when he wrote the intro to it, stating all the things he doesn't like about it. So there are plenty of editions out there that don't include that, but I think it's interesting. I will say, I almost think it's more interesting to read after you've read the book, because I read it before and it's long and I was getting kind of bored because it's not part of the story, and I always try to read the intros when they're included, but I will be honest with you, I get bored during them if they're too long. So that's a thing. But I think it's interesting after you've read the book because it talks about these themes that are emphasized and why he emphasized them at the time and why he wouldn't do it now, basically. So sex is a really big theme, as you could probably tell by the fact that his sister is a prostitute. But it isn't just there in the background. It is like, it is there and it is prominent, and it follows him throughout the novel. So even once he's no longer at home living with his sister, it's still a very prominent theme, because this 10 to 12-year-old Penn, he talks solely about these adult topics, even though he doesn't fully understand these adult topics. What he understands is that adult men don't like the Germans. They like to, I mean, they want to be part of this movement, the partisans, and fighting this war. But the biggest thing he understands, the number one thing that he is like, this is a fact, is that men love women. And not in a sweet way. Men love to be with women. So it's kind of interesting once you've read the book, because you can't miss it. You can't miss it. And then going back and reading his intro and having him say, you know, I was young, it was my first book. You can tell the things that I was struggling with in my own life, or that I was like learning to understand more by what I was really emphasizing then. I just think it's really interesting. It's almost like a little bit of like psychology experiment thrown in there when you get to read a book that was written by somebody and they're proud of it whenever it first came out, you know, it's their first publication, and then you go back and read the intro they wrote 10 years later where they're like, okay, but here's where I've grown. Here's what I wouldn't do anymore. I find that very intriguing. So, anywho, I guess what it comes down to is that it's a very quick read. So it's not a big commitment. If you've thought about reading it, you're unsure, maybe you've read some of his other works, I would recommend just going ahead and doing it. It's not going to take a lot of time out of your day. I mean, even if you're only reading, you know, when you get a chance, just in your free moments, you can knock it out in a week, no problem. So there's no reason really not to pick it up and give it a try, see if you enjoy it. I don't think it's the best book ever, but I do think it's interesting, especially if you have any interest in Italian history, which I do, clearly, because I studied abroad in Italy, and I've always found it very interesting, especially since you can go back through, you know, the Greeks and Romans and all of that, and there's a lot of history there that you don't necessarily get if you're just in a town in the US. It's a bit newer. There's not the old architecture and all of that, but I think it's a good read. I think it's an entertaining read. I don't think it's profound. This book has, from what I could gather, it has lovers and it has haters. It has people who think it is a gripping, just like highly intelligent telling story in that it addresses these big topics from the mind of a child. And then there are people who say that the people who think that are looking too far into it and it's really not that deep. I fall somewhere in the middle. I see both sides. I don't think it's like the book of the century. I just think it's a fun read. It's interesting hearing all of these things from Pin's perspective, and it's short enough that I don't feel the need to draw these huge conclusions. It can, for me, I am happy with it just being a casual read that I enjoyed, I can talk about with others, but I don't need to write a research paper over it. I'm fine. It is what it is. So I will say, I think I've mentioned on here before that I have a poster of essential novels that I'm trying to make my way through, and I usually read like 1 or 2 off of it, and then I'll read 2 to 4 books that aren't on it, kind of thing, because I have so many books I want to read. I don't want to, you know, put myself in a box with only reading off of it. One of the books on that list is by the same author. It's by Italo Calvino, but it's, I actually think it says on the back of this, yeah, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. So that's supposed to be a very good book. It's much later in his career, and I think it will be interesting to read that book now, having read one of his earlier works that I know he was not super happy with. So that's another reason to read it, I would say. If you've read any of his other works, which clearly there are ones that are well known, this mentions Invisible Cities and Mr. Palomar, and oh, there's another, Marco Valdo. I've heard of Mr. Palomar, I've heard of the Winter's Night Traveler one, of course. So if you've read any of his other books, I would recommend reading this one, if anything, just for like a bit of a thought experiment on seeing how much different his writing style is now, like how much it's evolved over not even that long of a time. I mean, 10 years is a long time, but you know, people write for lifetimes, so it's not that long. But it's really interesting. I think it's cool whenever you can see authors kind of find their voice and find their style. So it's a very good opportunity to see that with someone. So yeah, I would probably give it, I'd give it 7 out of 10 because it's an interesting read. It's a fun read. There's more to it there if you really want to dissect it. I don't feel like doing that per se. It's not why I picked it up, but I'd give it a good 7 out of 10. I would recommend it largely because it's quick, it's easy, there's nothing difficult or stressful about reading this book. You can just roll through it, and if you enjoy it, then that's wonderful and great, and if you don't, then you didn't waste that much time, so I don't really feel bad. Anyway, I'm gonna go finish my coffee and hop on the computer because I think we're a bit past when I'm supposed to start. Yeah, I'll be about 10 minutes late today, but that's alright. And I will check back in with you guys whenever I finish another book. The one I'm reading now is going very quickly, so it probably won't be too long. But it's called Black Edge, and it is about Stephen Cohen and SAC Capital and all of the insider trading that was going on. So it's actually a nonfiction. So it'll be the first nonfiction I do on here. So that'll be kind of fun, but it's a extremely interesting story if you have any interest whatsoever in Wall Street and particularly a lot of the corruption that we know. I mean, it's there, it's no secret, and especially with those, I mean, they were caught. So it's actually largely from the perspective of the FBI listening in on the wiretaps and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. So I'll be back on here with that one before too long. And yeah, hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see ya. Bye.